Hello, I would like to greet everyone a good day. My name is Hannah Loterio and this is my presentation for diversity. CHCD 4001 Presentation Assessment. So the topic given to me is the woman who requires a wheelchair on occasions when her symptoms are bad. This is by Hannah Loterio. This resource is not mine. I got it from the internet. All the resources I have, I'll put it in my presentation. Although we focus on disabled individuals here, we are constantly learning new things about them and their lifestyle. What makes them tick and what their needs are, and etc. Recently was that some wheelchair users don't like for people to assume they were in a bad car accident. It's not that accident-induced paralysis isn't common, it's that you shouldn't paint it with a broad brush. For instance, would you assume that every lung cancer victim was a smoker? Sure, the numbers might say most are, but it's still rude to assume. So what kind of injuries will result in someone becoming wheelchair bound? Here are 5 of the most common. Number 1 is spinal cord injury. Number 2 is polio. Number 3 is head injury. Number 4 is stroke. And the 5th one is multiple sclerosis or MS. So let's discuss the first one, which is spinal cord injuries. This is probably the one you're most familiar with. The human nervous system can be devastated by spinal cord injuries, which normally occur as a result of blunt force trauma. Car accidents are the most common causes of spinal cord injuries, but people have become paralyzed after horseback riding falls, football collisions, and even diving into a shallow water. The second one is polio. We haven't heard of any polio cases for a long time, but recently there has been an outbreak in Middle East and other parts of Asia and Africa. The vast majority of polio sufferers will experience mild or no symptoms, but a small minority can lose the ability to move in parts of the body, especially the legs. The most famous polio sufferer in history was President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The third point we're gonna discuss is head injury. Head injury, even a standard concussion, probably isn't strong enough to bring paralysis into play, but very severe head injuries are a risk. If the brain receives enough damage, it's possible to lose function in a large chunks of the body. Number 4 is stroke. The mechanism behind stroke is simple. Your brain is cut off from oxygen, so brain cells start to die. If enough brain cells are damaged during a stroke, that's when paralysis occurs. This type of paralysis can be very unpredictable, since the consequences of stroke vary widely from patient to patient. Last but not the least is MS, multiple sclerosis. This dreaded condition is responsible for robbing us of more Annette Funicello. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but that's the name, who was diagnosed with it in the late 80s. It operates by attacking the myelin that surrounds nerve fibers in the brain and spinal cord. If the nerves become sufficiently damaged, you can experience some muscle weakness, extreme fatigue, and yes, paralysis. Here are facts you need to know about using a wheelchair. When people see someone using a wheelchair, they often jump to conclusions. To clear up the confusion, here are facts you need to know. 1. People are not wheelchair bound. 2. A wheelchair is a part of someone's personal space. Third, don't assume someone who is in a wheelchair needs your help. Number 4, a wheelchair doesn't mean you can shake up in a dance floor. Number 5, a wheelchair user doesn't just hang out with their carers. Number 6, accessible toilets and parking spots are important. Number 7, yes, someone who uses a wheelchair can drive. 1. So with fact number 1, people are not wheelchair bound. The fact is, wheelchair users aren't bound to the chair. It's simply a device that lets them get from A to B. And when you think about it, using a wheelchair is actually quite the opposite of being bound. It is liberating and enabling for the person. And remember, not all people need to use their chair at all times. So there is no need to be shocked or accuse wheelchair users of faking it when they stand up. The fact is, there are many reasons someone may use a wheelchair. Periods of time only. Many conditions, for example, can cause chronic pain, fatigue, or restrict mobility. It could be that someone has multiple sclerosis or MS. For example, for some days, they might choose to walk, but on their bad days, they might choose to use their chair. Number 2 is very important, not only for the people who uses wheelchair, but for all of us. A wheelchair is part of someone's personal space. For many people, a wheelchair is an extension of their body, and therefore, rules of personal space applies to it as well. So that means, do not rest your feet on it, lean on it, or use it as an armchair. This is an invasion of personal space. It's the same as stranger coming along and resting their arm on your shoulder. Also, a general rule is, don't ever touch or move someone's wheelchair without the permission of the owner. This even applies even if the chair is not currently being used. Don't assume that someone who uses wheelchair needs your help. Often people's sentiment is in the right place when they jump to attention to help someone who uses a wheelchair. But we often see people going overboard to help someone when it's not actually needed. The thing is, many people don't actually need help and are quite comfy going about their day-to-day. But if you do see someone who you think could use a hand, the best thing to do is just actually ask them if they need some help. But if they say no, respect their answer and don't push the subject. Simple as that. Number 5, a wheelchair doesn't mean you can't shake up the dance floor. Unfortunately, it is not common for people to stare or comment when they see someone in a wheelchair at a club, at a bar, or at a party. But why can't someone in a wheelchair be shaking up the dance floor if they want to? Number 6, a wheelchair user doesn't just hang out with their carers. It might sound obvious, but people who uses wheelchair have friends, partners, kids, parents, and siblings just like anyone else. So if you see someone with a wheelchair hanging out with their peeps, don't assume they're their carers. Accessible toilets and parking spots are important. The general story here is simple. Accessible facilities such as toilets and parking spots exist because people need them. It's important to remember that these facilities are often limited too. So just because you don't want to stand in line or do another lap in the car park is not an excuse to use them. In fact, it's illegal to use an accessible parking space without a permit. Last but not the least, yes, someone who uses wheelchair can drive. In many cases, cars actually be modified to allow someone who uses wheelchair to drive. Foot pedals are raised, repositioned, or even replaced with hand-controlled devices. In some vehicles, a wheelchair user can get behind the wheel while still using their chair, thanks to a neat tracking device that anchors their chair to the car. So my topic is for a woman who requires a wheelchair on occasions when her symptoms are bad. I guess one example would be the MS, multiple sclerosis, because it's not, there's no definite time. It's only when her symptoms are bad that she needs a wheelchair. As we look back in the facts, one negative stereotype that people may think is that people with MS are faking it when they can stand up while using their wheelchair, but it's a different case for everyone. So that's it. That's my presentation. Thank you for listening.